All right, so now we come to part 3 and the process of the soul's transformation. First, I'd just like to say that this great work is about recovering the lost lunar sense of participatory awareness, the lost sense of relationship with all creation, including the cosmos. It's about reanimating the poetic vision and the imaginative sensibility that once connected us to nature and the cosmos. At the same time, it's about growing into our unique individuality, differentiating ourselves from the values that presently control the political and religious life of humanity, living from a totally different perspective on life, without seeing oneself as superior to other people or forcing one's views upon them. This is very important, because it's quite easy to get inflated by this material and think that you have to tell everybody about it. Repeat that paragraph? Yes. Okay. The great work is about recovering the lost lunar sense of participatory awareness, the lost sense of relationship with all creation. It is about reanimating the poetic vision, the imaginative sensibility that once connected us to nature and the cosmos. At the same time, it is about growing into our unique individuality, differentiating ourselves from the values that presently control the political and religious life of humanity, living from a totally different perspective on life without seeing oneself as superior in any way or forcing one's views upon other people. So we come to stage 1, this is called the lesser work, and it's the creation of the white stone or rose. I always like to include the rose because it's so much an image of nature and of the beauty that we all love. So alchemy defines 3 and sometimes 4 stages in the great work of transforming the soul and bringing forth the stone or gold. This process is circulatory and continuous and moves through the different phases over and over again. It extends over a lifetime, maybe many lifetimes. The whole process is about the expansion of consciousness and about deepening the connection with an invisible field or dimension of reality. So in this lesser work, there are 2 stages. One stage is about separating the soul from the body or becoming aware of this deeper dimension, and it's called the nigredo or separatio. It's the phase of death and dissolution, and often accompanied by depression, a blackness blacker than black, the alchemists called it. And its symbol, the symbol of the depression, was the raven, this dark phase. And the second stage was called the albedo or solutio, and it's about opening the heart, the dawning of illumination and wisdom. And its symbols are the queen, and the white stone or rose, and the lily, the dove, and the swan. All right for me to move on, or do you still want a bit of time? I'll wait a little bit. If anybody wants the text of this, I can email it to them. Well, it's what's called a late thought. But rather than struggling to get it all down, it's much easier. It's so easy to just send you an attachment. Okay? Right. So here's the alchemist again, this time in a more reduced picture without the border. And he's holding the flask which contains the prima materia, or the elements of himself which are to undergo a process of transformation. And the inscription says, "Let us go and seek the nature of the 4 elements." That's earth, air, fire, and water. As the work proceeds, the alchemist himself becomes the vessel in which the transmutation takes place. He gives birth to the stone, or the stone is birthed in him. Now, alchemy sets this supreme quest in the context of a marriage between the solar and lunar aspects of the soul, the fiery gold of the masculine element and the volatile silver of the feminine one, a union between our head and our heart, between our rational consciousness focused through thinking and our instinctive consciousness focused through the heart, through intuition and feeling. This marriage also unites the invisible dimension of the subtle world with the visible material world of our experience. What this whole process amounts to is not only a transformation, but a revelation, an illumination as we go along into it and through it. In this picture, Sol and Luna are connecting to each other with their left hands. Their right hands hold a flowering branch, and a third branch, descending from the dove and the star above, intersects their branches. This last branch indicates the participation of spirit in the work and the connection with the subtle world. So this comes near the beginning of this beautiful text called the Rosarium, and it's indicating what is to come, so to speak, that spirit will be participating all the way through. Now, I've brought here, there's a wonderful book, can't remember the author, it's called The Birth of a Child, and I would recommend it to anybody, just for the sheer beauty of the images. So they say that the alchemist said, this art is like an embryo, and then the birth of a child is the process that is reflected in the physical process that we all go through. So on the left we have the egg before it is attached to the wall of the uterus. And in the middle, this is the embryo at 21 days. This is all of us at 21 days. And this shows that the size of the heart, and behind the heart, or even out of the heart, I'm not quite sure which, the two hemispheres of the brain are beginning to form. And that's part of a whole section, as it were, of the embryo. I haven't showed the whole of it there. And then this turns into the fetus as it goes on. So I just thought these images are very moving, and that book is absolutely extraordinary. Recommended to be given to all grandchildren who want to know how life is made. Just remember the connection between the heart and the right hemisphere of the brain, which is the first to develop. The left hemisphere comes after. I'm not quite sure how much after, but it does come later. I can't remember. My memory has gone. It's Neil somebody or other. It's a.
Oh yes, it is. Neil something.
There are two names, but if you just put "A Child is Born" into Amazon, you'll get it. So the first phase of the lesser work is ruled by the element fire, because it's all about disintegration, burning up the elements which need to be removed from the face of spirit, as it were. The nigredo or separatio, and these putrefaction, calcination and mortification are the three terms that go with this phase, which is very painful. Anyone who's been through this, and I'm sure all of you have in one way or another, it can be manifested as depression, or as illness, or as confusion, or as breakdown, all sorts of things, but it's a very difficult phase. But generally speaking, the alchemists saw this phase as a state of blind suffering and ignorance for the whole of humanity, as it were, before awareness dawns. They also called it the unio naturalis, meaning the state where we live from day to day, responding to events as they happen, where we believe we have control of our lives but are the victim of events, and also of complexes, beliefs, archaic drives and habits which control us. In this state, the spirit is not awake, not free, but is the prisoner or victim of all of these things. So to awaken from this state involves the separation of the conscious and unconscious aspects of the soul that have been bound together, as it were, in a kind of incestuous union. They've been sort of spliced together because nobody knew that there was another part of the psyche that existed. And this is quite difficult in analytical work to help the person come to awareness that there is another whole dimension of themselves that they need to know about. So the ego is still unconsciously bound to the unconscious until it becomes aware that there are two separate parts, so to speak, that need relating. So the nigredo is the phase of the ego's dying and death as it gives up its illusion of freedom and supremacy and power and control and becomes aware that it has to pay attention to something else in life as well. So they said, or rather the Emerald Tablet of Hermes Trismegistus says, separate the earth from the fire, the subtle from the dense, gently and with great ingenuity. I like the word gently because it must be a very slow process, not a violently imposed process. So the elements of the psyche have to be separated out from each other, soul from body, ego from instinct. The danger of this first stage is the attempt to overcome the instincts by repressing or denying them. The patriarchal religions, in particular Christianity, tried to achieve this separation, but in a way that did great violence to the body and the sexual instinct. And we can see the effects of this today in all the, among other things, the terrible abuse of children because of the repression of a natural instinct. That's why the alchemists stress that the work of separation should be done gently and slowly. They said if you do it rapidly, you risk insanity and death. Now Paracelsus said, putrefaction is of so great efficacy that it blots out the old nature and transmutes everything into another new nature and bears another new fruit. All living things die in it, all dead things decay, and then all these dead things regain life. And this is the life of nature, that the trees fall into the soil, they turn into compost, compost eventually turns into fossilized wood, which then turns into oil. So it's all a sort of, and then we dig up the oil and it starts all over again. So the whole of nature is this process of living, decaying, dying, and being reborn in a new form. Now, the nigredo brings us to the encounter with the dragon, who personifies the materia prima and the unconscious instinctual soul. And here is rather a graphic image of the alchemist encountering the dragon, who looks as if he's not going to go accommodatingly to be changed, as it were. And this is another very graphic image of the green lion swallowing the sun. The green lion was an image that preoccupied Newton, because Newton's studies, his alchemical studies, make up, I think, 4/5 of his work. They've never been published. Don't know why. And he puzzled and puzzled, what could this green lion mean? But what I think it means, he's swallowing the sun. So this is an image of the ego or the conscious mind being swallowed up by the instinct as it descends in order to encounter this other world that it knows nothing about. And the ego, as it were, turns black in the body of the lion. The ego is no longer able to be in control. It can only surrender. When Martina Navratilova was diagnosed with breast cancer recently, she said, "I cried, it knocked me off my ass. I feel so in control of my life and my body, and then this comes, and it's completely out of my hands." So that's the feeling. There's nothing I can do about this. My husband is leaving me. I have to sell my house. I'm bankrupt, whatever it may be. It's the, you have no longer any control. I think for all of us, there are times in our lives when we have felt like this. We're left without anything to hold on to that gives us security and meaning. The will to live may go, and we can be assailed by paralyzing depression, a deep melancholia, a lack of energy or interest in anything. Sometimes this is brought on by a bereavement, the loss of someone who means everything to us, who may have been a lifelong partner, sometimes by the loss of belief in God, sometimes by a life-threatening illness, sometimes by the loss of our marriage, our job, our money, or our home, or all of them together. The alchemist was frequently swallowed up by feelings of futility and despair as he watched the matter in his vessel putrefy or turn black, and his efforts turn to nothing. Green is the color of putrefaction, but it's also the color of regeneration, so we may expect something to emerge from this image of the green lion. Another name for the nigredo is the separatio, which brings one into direct contact with the shadow or unknown elements in one's psyche. The man without a shadow thinks himself harmless precisely because he is ignorant of his shadow. That's what Jung said in the Psychology of the Transference, if anybody's interested. So separatio involves conflict and suffering. The original sense of oneness of our being is being split into two. Yet paradoxically, this work of differentiation is the first stage of reuniting the conscious solar aspect of our psyche with the instinctual lunar aspect. And I may say that depression, if any of you have suffered from it, as I have, and I know several people perhaps in the audience who have, depression is often a call from the unconscious. In my case, it most certainly was that. I know what it came from in a sort of sense of experience of my own family or whatever, but it's really saying you can't live on the surface, you have to go down, and in order to go down, you're being called by this depression. It's the only way that the unconscious can signal its desire for communication. And that's the way I've interpreted my own depressions, and each time I go into one, I stay in it maybe for, I don't know what, a few days or a few hours, a few weeks, but I learn something from that. Something new comes in because I'm brought into the very depths again, and the depths want to communicate something. So I would pass that on as a message to all of you. Now we come to this image of calcinatio, which is the burning away of the dross. Now here we have an image of the intermediate male-female entity that the alchemists called the rebus, not yet in its completed state of differentiation. It's an image of what they call the first conjunctio, when the previous unconscious state is differentiated into two separate yet conjoined units. So here the rebus is undergoing the burning away of the dross that has covered the gold of the spirit. It's being whitened in the fire and turned into ashes. So fire, in this phase, is the main agent of transformation. Now, in a collective sense, I think that humanity in the last century, and this one, has been going through a terrible calcinatio. We've witnessed the images of incineration in the gas ovens of Auschwitz, in the firebombing of Dresden and Hamburg, the obliteration of Hiroshima. We've witnessed the deaths by napalm and depleted uranium and white phosphorus bombs, the burning of houses and cities, and the horrific fiery destruction of the Twin Towers, and the bombing of Baghdad and other cities. So millions of helpless civilians died in these events that they had absolutely no control over, that were imposed upon them by the unconsciousness of the West, I would say, or the general unconsciousness of humanity. And here's a dream of mine that I had maybe 40, maybe 50 years ago, which shows how it takes a long time for things to come to consciousness. I'm in a garden, walled and square, with a central wall bisecting it through the middle. In one part of the garden is a beautiful blossoming apple or cherry tree. This is difficult to read. Beyond the garden, the whole horizon of the world is ringed by burning cities. I am crawling on my stomach along the central wall, which is ablaze with fire. As I crawl slowly and with great difficulty along the wall, I look up towards another wall in front of me, forming a sort of T-junction with the one that I am on. And appearing over the top of this, as if standing on a ladder on the other side, there is a man wearing a strange hat that falls to one side. He is waiting for me to pass through the fire and come to meet him. As I inch my way along the wall towards him, I recognize him as the gardener, the keeper of the garden. It's such a wonderful image. So I've kept that dream, as it were, 40 years, maybe 50 years. It was one of the opening dreams of my first Jungian analysis. And I didn't understand it. I didn't know what it meant. And so I've been working my way along that wall for some 50 years. And I haven't met the gardener yet, and yet the gardener is there all the time, both within and without. So here's another example of this mortificatio. No new life can arise without the death of the old. So this is the death of the old unconscious way of living and seeing life. And their feelings of suffocation and constriction, loss and grief. It's really a dark night of the soul. And yet this image goes right back to the mysteries of Osiris in Egypt, with the death of Osiris and his rebirth as the grain sprouting from the grave there. So, as I say, this mythology is very, very ancient, and it really is the mythology of the soul. This stage of the nigredo was repeated many times in the alchemical work, even just before the rubedo stage is reached. So it's not that you sort of leave it behind. It can come again and again. And these depressions can come again and again. The alchemists prayed to be delivered from the horrid darkness of their minds. But out of the depression, as I said, would come a deeper connection to the psychic matter that was being transformed. So we come to this image from the Splendor Solis of the fragmentation, of the cutting up of the body, so to speak, and the cutting off of the solar head, which is representing the sulfur being dismembered in the retort, as it were. So here a man is holding a sword and a golden severed head and standing in front of a dismembered body. And this image also takes us back to the lunar myths of death and regeneration and the dismemberment of Osiris and his regeneration, so that we know that after the experience of dying there will be rebirth, regeneration. And you can see in the background there's a ship approaching which will be bringing new material, treasures or something from far away. And all around are, as usual, the images of nature, and below there's the red stone, which I think may herald the coming of the rubedo, or the red stone. So dismemberment is an image of letting go of old beliefs and changing patterns of behavior in which the life spirit has become imprisoned or entangled or buried. It's undoing the whole structure we've created in the last 5,000 years or whatever, the adaptation to our culture and its beliefs and its values. Psychic growth is a very painful process for the ego or the conscious mind, and this image of dismemberment reflects it. But again, you see the beautiful border around the edge, which symbolizes bringing oneself into relationship with nature and the flowering of nature within and all around us. And here's another image which symbolizes this phase of killing the king, who sits there apparently quite happy at having been clobbered by all these great whacking, whatever they are, missiles. And so we have many images of the death of the old king, the death of the old ruling consciousness that has become calcified and addicted to power and control. It's lost touch with feeling and with eros, and it has to be dissolved in fire and water in order to be reborn in a new, more complete form. There are many images of the old king dying, often lying sweating in a bed or in a kind of sauna bath. And here's another one of him being given poison to drink. And again, he doesn't say, no, take it away. He seems to hold out his hand, willing to accept this process. And now I come to the dragon again. I'm going to spend a little bit of time because here is an actual alchemical image of how the dragon entangles us all in its grip. And it's very, very graphic and quite funny, really, I think. And sooner or later, the alchemist came up against this great power of the dragon. The ego's descent into the depths of the instinctual soul brought them into direct confrontation with it. But remember that the dragon is Mercurius, or spirit manifesting as the prima materia that is going through this transformation. So here's another gorgeous image of the dragon, which I found on the internet. I can't remember where, but there was a website with dozens of these wonderful dragons on it, and I took this one from it. So Jung said that really he talked about our primordial soul and this instinctual soul which is at the root of our own developed consciousness, and the immense creative energy of that power, that instinct. I think one has to remember that it's the immense creative energy of life, the energy of the cosmos. It's not just ours, it comes to us from the cosmos and lives through us. Do you remember Jung's painting of bowing down before a great sort of eruption in the Red Book? Those of you who've seen it? Well, that's the sort of feeling of what it is. So in relation to the power of the dragon, our still fragile and immature conscious mind is like an ant compared to a dinosaur. It can easily be overwhelmed and possessed by this power, or can use it for its own ends, believing that what it is doing is justifiable and necessary, as when we get taken into war. So an unconscious dragon acts blindly, following the pathways that are familiar to it through millions of years, and its energy and creativity can be harnessed by the conscious minds to goals that injure and destroy life. All our weapons, for instance, the power of the dragon is reflected in our drive for control and power over nature, in our addiction to weapons of mass destruction, and the pattern of predator attacking and killing its prey, which is really what war is all about. It has its noble, heroic side, but it's also this other side of having to kill somebody or something before you yourself get killed. So there's a survival instinct deeply at work there. So to bring all this to conscious awareness, seeing what we are doing from the perspective of spirit, is a colossal undertaking. And our consciousness, this conscious mind that we've developed, is the only factor that can really bring insight into this situation. God is not going to do it for us. We've got to see it for ourselves, and it's difficult. Now here's our green dragon again. So I also say the dragon is also life's power to heal, to create, to transform. It's the colossal energy that lives through us. It's our incredible survival skills, which have kept us going through all these thousands of years, the source of all our brilliant technical skills and our longing to alleviate the suffering of the human condition. So it's ambivalent. It depends on what we make of it, really. The dragon is the energy that expresses itself in so many marvelous creations of the human soul. And for centuries, in the interests of survival, we've tried to master and control and direct this immense power to serve our own needs. But alchemy asks us to relate to the dragon in a different way. And so I've put this image in, another which I got from that website, which is really, it's not in any way a confrontation with the dragon, it's really allying yourself with this great power and serving it, but in a conscious way. The solar era has given us countless images of heroes fighting and killing dragons, but what about the warrior who enters into the domain of the dragon, who serves the dragon and gains the dragon as an ally, not a servant, wielding his sword on its behalf? In myth, as you remember, the dragon guards a great treasure. Do you remember the story of the golden fleece, which has to be captured while the serpent is sleeping, or the dragon is sleeping? And it yields that treasure to the man or woman who is not overcome by terror or inflated and possessed by its fiery power. Now Now here's an image of the dragon undergoing this transformation. It's not being killed, it's being restrained or tied up, having its feet tied together. And its unconscious way of behaving is changing. It's upside down. And it's being tied up and it doesn't like the experience. I don't think. This is Sol and Luna carrying out this work together. And here, this very strange image, which I find very, very moving for some reason, is an image of a woman lying in the embrace of a dragon in a grave. So I leave you to your own interpretation of this image. Is it portraying the kiss of life or a kiss of death, a loving embrace, or something that's pulling you down into the depths? Is the dragon or the woman undergoing transformation, or both? So this whole phase of the Nigredo is a descent into, an encounter with a part of our nature that has been greatly feared and that has great power over us, that few of us know how to relate to. Because it's been shut off from communication, it has remained trapped in archaic patterns of behavior. It carries a huge potential for both creation and destruction that flows from the power of spirit, but spirit that has been made to serve the deficient goals of the conscious mind. In spite of all the efforts of religion, we haven't made a great deal of progress, I don't think, in some respects. So here we have Sol and Luna in the tomb, with the figure of death on one side and Saturn on the other. Saturn is very much the governor of this whole phase of the Nigredo. In the view of the alchemist, the phase of the Nigredo can be compared to the crucifixion of Christ. It's about the suffering that comes with unbearable grief, loss, and pain, but also the difficult sacrifice of the old unconscious way of living, the old attitudes and habits and beliefs. However, the melancholia and suffering of the alchemist is also the anguish of spirit itself, undergoing the travail and pain of sacrifice and transformation. In this whole thing of being incarnated on the earth, it's gone through all that we've experienced in the way of pain and sacrifice. So the spirit suffers with us in our own lives because we are part of it. And both spirit and ourselves are participating, as it were, in a cosmic passion play. Now, I just want to emphasize the importance of the ego, because nothing can be done, really, unless we have a relatively strong ego, strong enough to stand self-assessment and self-awareness. And Jung said that the unconscious can be integrated only if the ego holds its ground. It's very important for the ego to assess and interpret this material that's coming up, not to be kind of swallowed up or overwhelmed by it. And that's where analysis can help, or therapy can help. So the experience recurs over and over again, the Nigredo, in the course of the alchemical work. And you may be snatched away into the underworld like Persephone by depression, but you return, like Persephone, to the upper world again. And the antidote to remaining in the grip of despair or depression is to enter into a dialogue with them and to create a relationship with them as if they were a living person. And this takes time to do. It can't be done overnight, so to speak. And Jung gave us the method of active imagination, which helped us with this. So now we come to the second phase of the lesser work, which is the creation of the white stone. And as I said, it's called the albedo or solutio, and its ruling image is water. Water that cleanses, washes, purifies, and refreshes. And it's about the dawning of illumination and the preparation of the queen, of Luna. And its symbols are the white stone or the rose, as I've said, all these ones, the lily and the dove, the swan, and also the whiteness of the dawn sky before sunrise. That was very important as an image. So in this stage there'll be images of water in all forms, maybe water as a fountain or as a bath or as a swimming pool, as a sea, a flood or a tidal wave. All these different images are referring to this phase of the albedo or solutio. It's a phase of baptism or immersion in the watery dimension of the soul, the realm of feeling and instinct. The first real exposure, as it were, to the power of this dimension, power of feelings and instinctual drives. So they said, go to the woman who washes her sheets and do as she does. And they said, study, meditate, sweat, work, wash and cook. They called themselves washerwomen and cooks. So that takes you back to MasterChef. They also said, this divine water makes the dead living and the living dead. It lightens the darkness and darkens the light. That is to say, it darkens the bright light of solar consciousness and illuminates the consciousness of the deeper realm of instinct. Now this is an interesting passage. It comes from a commentary by Marie-Louise von Franz in this text called the Aurora Consurgens. And she writes that the whitening of the albedo is the coming of the dawn of awareness or dawning consciousness, which is associated with the feminine, white, dewy substance that is fertilized by the spirit in alchemical work. It is not a concentrated light like the sun, but a diffused glow on the horizon, on the threshold of consciousness. The dawning of wisdom is this feminine light of illumination, gnosis, and the realization of self. By the way, it's a wonderful book, that the Aurora Consurgens. Very moving. I'm coming back to it in a later stage. So I would say that the albedo or solutio is about immersion in the amniotic fluid of the soul, a different kind of watery womb, in order to be reborn. It's a process of washing, cleansing, purifying, and seeing more clearly. The light of a new quality of insight dawns in the soul. The alchemist compared this stage to the gradual whitening of the sky after the obscurity of night, and also to the moon or moonlight, because the moon really rules over this whole phase of the albedo. It's about the awakening of the heart, the feelings of the heart, of compassion for oneself and for the world. One must not leave oneself out of this compassion. Very important. Because if you haven't got compassion for yourself, it's very, very difficult to truly have compassion for others. There has to be an inclusive thing. And if you're ever, if you notice you're in a bad mood or angry with other people or whatever it may be, if you ask yourself, where am I hating myself? Where am I criticizing myself? You may see that you can dissolve that, and immediately you feel quite different about other people. It dissolves the projection. So it's about dissolving rigid, fixed beliefs, melting the snow and ice of frozen feelings. And also in this phase comes the discovery of unknown potential, gifts, possibility. For instance, I discovered my own gift of writing, which I didn't know I had. And it just developed out of this whole process. So there comes a fluidity and a relatedness, many, many tears, shedding of many tears, and integrating the shadow, both the unlived creative aspects and also the destructive aspects that are the result of deep wounds to the heart. When you think of the wounds that humanity carries as a result of all the suffering that it's been through in these thousands of years, all the losses, mothers that have lost their sons, husbands, their sons, and wives, their husbands, I mean, the really horrific amount of tears which have never been really requited or never been healed, these deep wounds. On a lighter vein, I'm reminded of those young men on MasterChef who've given up their careers. One of them was a specialist in children's diseases who've to devote themselves to this new passion of cooking. They've really, and one was a company director or something, following their heart instead of their head. It's quite interesting to see the way they expressed it. So the albedo is about discovering relationship and the value of relationship, and that takes us into the ground of life, into the feelings of the deepest joy and also the deepest sorrow. And this phase is not without conflict, because the conscious solar mind may be terrified of surrendering its power and descending into this lunar matrix of the instinctual soul, the mother from which it's emerged. And here you see Sol and Luna are fighting each other. He is armed and she is naked. And note the lunar emblem of the solar figure and the sun on the shield of the lunar one, so that like yin-yang, they've got elements of the other in themselves. But change is threatening, and denial is part of the instinctive defense against transformation. Hence the furious attack on any idea which challenges the belief system of the rational mind. And you can see this in the medical sphere, or you can see it in the scientific sphere, like Rupert Sheldrake had to go through hell, branded as a heretic because of his theory of the morphogenetic field. So it comes up many times in our own culture. So here, in an image from Splendor Solis again, is an image of the albedo. There's the man sitting in the bath with the fire being kindled underneath. There's the dove of the Holy Spirit resting on his head, which shows that this is presiding, divine wisdom is presiding over this whole process. A marvelous city in the background, and of course the beautiful border of flowers. So one could say that by these methods of the nigredo and the albedo, the quintessential gold of the spirit is beginning to emerge from beneath the rust or the verdigris which has accrued to it over the millennia of human evolution. And the passionate intensity of devotion to the work is the fire that transforms, the fire deriving from spirit itself. So here we have another image of washing and fire. This great tub into which the sheets are going to be put and cleaned. Very graphic image, and yet very related to everyday life. Now, this is a quotation from an alchemist called Artephius. Because Sol and Luna have their origin from this water, their mother, it is necessary, therefore, that they enter into it again, to wit, into their mother's womb, that they may be regenerate or born again and made more healthy and more noble and more strong. So there you have it in words much clearer than mine, I think, saying this need to return to the womb. And here we have an image of Sol and Luna as brother and sister who are persuaded to drink and to embrace each other, to drink from the loving cup. This goes back to Tristan and Isolde and the Grail legends, although they weren't brother and sister, but there's the thing of drinking the loving cup and as a prelude to union. Sacred incest is part of the alchemical work, which may go back again to Egypt with the marriage of Pharaoh with his sister, right the way along the line. And here we have an image of the king and queen in union. This is the first image of this kind. Again, it's from the text called the Rosarium. I showed it to you before, but I'm bringing it in here because it belongs to this particular phase of alchemy. So this is an image of the second conjunctio. The first one was with the prima materia, so this is the second one, where the king has entered into the waters of the soul and is joined with the queen, who was once his mother but is now becoming his bride. In entering these waters, the king has entered the realm of the heart, of his feelings, his instincts. And this is a repetition of what I said before, but I think I say it again. This union means that our logical, analytical, masculine mind begins to value and pay attention to feeling, and to develop a different, more feminine and participatory and empathic way of relating to life, to recognize that the soul may have demands that go beyond the focus of the rational mind. So in this phase, there can be a great deal of crying and a deep regret and sorrow. There's also the sorrow of reaching the end of life, which people who get into their 70s and 80s and 90s, deep regret that one has to leave behind this life into which one's put so much, and children and grandchildren. It's a terrible pain, and it's not perhaps acknowledged or recognized that this saying goodbye to everything that's been experienced is a deep, deep sorrow. And there also may be bitterness over past mistakes, things one wishes one could have done better and couldn't, relationships that went wrong, so to speak. So there's a letting go and a surrender, and at the same time a washing away of these resentments and this deep pain. If you put it into a wider context, if you just look at it from the point of view of one life, I think it becomes impossible to sustain the pain. But if you put it in a context of a long, long process, even as the humanities process, it's no longer so unbearable. It takes a different dimension. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah? So the rising moon of this phase signifies the dawn of relationship with the matrix of the soul, the crescent moon, as it were. And in relation to the chakras in the Indian system, it would be moving through the second and third chakras into the heart chakra. So the effect of this washing and cleansing and clarifying process is that the creative imagination is activated, and a stream of living water begins to flow from the depths of the soul in the form of ideas, intuitions, inspirations, sudden realizations, synchronicities, sometimes visions or visionary dreams, like the one I had of the calcinatio. So the work that the alchemists did in painting their images was work that they did hand in hand in spirit, was to fix spirit in this dimension of experience with the very considerable artistic skills that they had, or work to develop, because it's amazing really how gifted they were. And as they drew or painted, they understood everything at a deeper level. Their insight was clarified by this process of washing, as it were, even as they worked. The very act of devotion to this work developed their insight. So the white stone or the white queen was constellated, and the precious dew of wisdom begins to be secreted. Precious dew of wisdom belongs to the symbolism of the descent of water, as it were. Now we come to perhaps my favorite image, again from Trismosin, of this dark man emerging from the mud. And I think that Trismosin has given us an image of the heroic achievement of these first two stages of alchemy in this painting, of this man emerging from the black mud of the Negredo, being welcomed by a woman who has white wings and a crown and a star on her head. She is wisdom, the presiding image of alchemy, the presiding figure of alchemy. And she's holding the red robe, which symbolizes the final stage of alchemy and the new regenerated consciousness. One of the man's arms and his head are already red. One arm is white. The alchemist called this strange figure the mighty Ethiopian, which takes us back to the figure of Osiris and the lunar mythology of death and regeneration. So an alchemist called Gerhard Dorn said, "Little by little and from day to day, he will perceive with his mental eyes and with the greatest joy some sparks of divine illumination." Now I come to this image from a book, the Aurora Kunsurgens, I think painted in the 15th century. I'm not sure by who, I don't know that anybody knew who it's by. And she's called the Luna Sophia, or the image of the wisdom that's buried in our instinctual life and who's been held prisoner there. She's holding open her womb to reveal a golden serpent wrapped around a sword. And in this phase of the albedo, her voice can begin to be heard. And in this wonderful text of the Aurora Consurgens, she says, "Be turned to me with all your heart, and do not cast me aside because I am black and swarthy, because the sun hath changed my colour, and the waters have covered my face, because I stick fast in the mire of the deep, and my substance is not disclosed. Wherefore out of the depths have I cried, and from the abyss of the earth with my voice, to all you who pass by the way, attend and see me. If any shall find one unto me, if any shall find one like unto me, I will give into his hand the morning star." So that connects back to the image before of the woman standing with the morning star on her head. It's so deep, this, and so rich. It's just incredible, really, that all this material has managed to survive and come down to us. So I think what she's calling for is the transformation of our whole conscious attitude through the power of love, which can release the flowing power of feeling to reach out to that which has been rejected and misunderstood, specifically to the body, which must be cleansed of all the negative projections that have injured it. So we come to the end of the first phase and the formation of the white stone, symbolized by the Lunar Queen, and there she is standing in the vessel. Above we have Mercury sitting in a chariot drawn by two cocks who herald the coming of the dawn. The Lunar Queen personifies the completed stage of the albedo, and she's surrounded with the beginning of a golden aureole of the completed work. The matter that is being transmuted has now reached a stage of fixation that no fire of passion can destroy. And below there is a scene showing the flourishing of the arts and the sciences, which of course come under this phase of activating the imagination. So matter has been raised through this first stage of the nigredo and the albedo to a state where it can become the vehicle for the emergence or incarnation of spirit, the full emergence or incarnation. Part of the work of the albedo is to redeem the body, healing the split between mind and body, and becoming aware of the atrocious suffering inflicted on the body throughout the solar era. The origin of all negative projections onto the body is the belief that since the body has to die, it must be contaminated by sin. It's been punished. Death is the punishment meted out, and the body carries that. This was deeply in the Christian tradition. But it wasn't in the pagan tradition, because they had the feeling of regeneration and rebirth. And death is the punishment that was meted out to the body for the sin of its fleshly appetites. It's ludicrous, really. A colossal work of healing and transformation is asked for here in order for the body and matter to be recognized as the living expression of spirit. So here, to end, I've got two images. One is an alchemical one, showing the coronation of the Virgin. And it's really in relation to the Christian myth, the completion of the phase of the albedo and the nigredo corresponds to the coronation of the Virgin. Jung thought that alchemy had prepared the way for the two papal bulls of 1950 and 1954 that named the Virgin Mary as Queen of Heaven, because that was all about raising matter to the level of spirit, and the union of matter and spirit in the bridal chamber, the thalamus, really, of the divine bridal chamber. And he anticipated that there would be a big change of consciousness in society as this image worked its way into public awareness, and as the earth and matter and the body, as aspects of the feminine, were raised in human consciousness to the level of spirit. We can see it reflected in the empathic relationship to the earth that's now coming into being, and we can also see it in the fascination with the figure of Mary Magdalene and her possible relationship with Jesus. That there is the desire for the archetype of the union of the two great aspects of spirit to come into manifestation in our world. And I think we owe a great debt of gratitude to Michael Bagent, who's here with us, who really brought this into public consciousness long, long before Dan Brown did with his book. So here again, finally, is this Christian image of the Assumption of the Virgin, beautiful Renaissance image. I think that reaching ever deeper into the heart of their psychic life that was reflected in the mirror of their retort, the alchemists began to see the unity of everything, how the ground of everything is spirit. They saw that matter is not dead, inert. They felt the aliveness of matter and worked to extricate the spirit hidden within it, entered into a dialogue with it, and wept with the wonder and amazement of what they were discovering and understanding. Their growing insight worked a profound transformation of their consciousness, an illumination of their understanding, and that has all been passed on in the depths of the collective psyche to us, who can really bring it to life within us. But they did the work. They really did the work. So now we can have any questions before the coffee break. Jane, would you?
It's probably quite a basic question, but it's been playing on my mind as you've been talking, which is that I'm a bit confused about one of the stages in the process, where, if I got it right, the calcinatio is the final phase of the nigredo.
Not the final. No,
is it not?
It's just part of the nigredo.
It's part of it.
Yeah.
Because I think of calcinatio as being white, and so I'm sort of thinking, well...
No, it's the burning away to white.
It's the burning away to white,
ashes.
So it's a sort of transition through maybe grey ashes into white.
Yes, but the... wait a minute, let me think for a second. It comes up in the next stage that I'm going to go into after the break.
Okay.
Okay?
Right.
So you take the matter that has been rendered into ash and you do something with it in the next phase.
Because you've gone into albedo already, and so I sort of keep on wondering about...
I've gone into albedo?
Albedo.
Albedo.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that is just the cleansing and the washing. The burning comes first. It's the most difficult and the most painful. The washing is the awakening and the illuminating stage. You begin to become aware that there's something that you didn't realize before, you didn't know about before.
Yes.
Whereas the first stage you may not realize very much at all. It's
Yes.
just disintegration or dissolving.
Great. Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
And just to pick up what you were saying right at the end there of this section, this whole information and this huge history seem to have such an importance for our age. And it's clear that there is a huge awakening of consciousness. And yet it's hard to conceive of a language that could be heard today where this kind of wisdom could be communicated. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts on how this is coming into life now and what's the medium for it?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer because I've tried myself to get it on television with no success whatsoever. I have a nephew who works in television on Channel 4, but there's just no way of getting this material through in this form. And I think it probably needs younger generation than myself. I'm now kind of moving outwards, as it were. It needs your generations coming up, 20 years younger than myself, and to perhaps find ways of reconnecting it to the culture. Maybe in synchronicity, maybe some sort of thing will happen. I know that people are aware of my book, The Dream of the Cosmos, and all this material. I know that a lot of them have read it, but they can't see a way of making a bridge, and so they don't take it up, so to speak. They think that the people are too unaware or too stupid or too whatever it may be, or uninterested. But I don't think that's true at all. I think people would be very interested.
Because it's so ancient and so well honed over centuries and centuries. I mean, it is such long-lived wisdom, and it has obviously communicated itself in so many ways over the different centuries that it seems unimaginable that it won't have some way of communicating now. I'm just wondering what it is.
Yeah, I think the way would be through mythology, probably, through stories. That's the best way, particularly for interesting children. Okay, thank you very much for that question.
Can I ask, is it literally so that you should wash and clean and cook? Would they have actually been doing it? And is that what
Well,
the
it's a good
way
idea
forward?
to keep oneself clean, as those poor people who are travelling back from God knows where. You know, they haven't had a bath for 6 days.
But as part of the alchemical process, apart from the necessity.
Well, it would be
for
caring for the body, definitely. Caring for the body and seeing that it was happy and content as much as possible, yes. Definitely. It wouldn't be
But we
putting on
do
the...
that anyway, don't we? What is it about the process where they encourage you to...
Well, I think it's the clearing away of the excess baggage that we may carry. That would be one thing. Looking carefully at one's beliefs, saying, are these really necessary? What are they really telling me? Are they giving me the kind of values that respect life, or are they not? And it's really assessing. That's where the conscious mind comes in, looking at what's happening around one, or what's happening in one's own life. And the washing away might be, say, in a relationship that's difficult, where there's a lot of anger and recrimination, and, you know, it's all your fault, or it's all your fault. It would be bringing this albedo thing of washing away the resentments and the anger that's between people. That would be one way of looking at it, perhaps.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say I'm very hopeful, actually, because when you see books like Lynn McTaggart's The Field and Bruce Lipton, The Biology of Belief, and also Avatar, that in fact there is a way through. I mean, you only have to see the way modern, the Brontes have been brought to the screen, and actually the book sales of the original are going up. So I think it is a question of time.
I agree,
and just a different kind of way through, perhaps sideways rather than full on.
Yes. Well, do you remember that film, Close Encounters of the Third Kind? Well, that was a real sort of demarcation point, and fascinating. People were absolutely riveted. And also E.T. Yeah. So a lot can be done by film, I think. And Avatar, I haven't seen Avatar yet, but I'm looking forward to it. I must see it, okay, I will see it. Any other questions before we have some tea?
Just wanted to add something to this issue. I mean, the basic idea is to kind of heal the spirit-matter split and to reconnect with the feminine again, and also probably the kind of imagery or that particular process alchemy is describing and using is probably not being carried over into our time exactly as it was then, but I nevertheless feel that this idea of that that this world is kind of sick with this overly masculine identification, and that the feminine energy is needed in our times to achieve a healing. I feel that the awareness of these things is quite abundant. Actually, you feel it on the internet, and a lot of people are talking about these issues. I mean, you are one of the speakers for that, and you did so with your seminar in autumn, and there are others out there. So I think there's quite a heightening awareness of the divine feminine, and that it needs to be brought back into our world. And if this is happening, and maybe I can also mention this, talking about the ascension in 2012, and maybe whatever that actually is, but it might be that this is the transition from the split ages of the solar and the lunar consciousness now actually being healed, and that a new consciousness of wholeness is evolving in these days, and that this will be the new age.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. I think that the internet is a tremendous catalyst for this connection of everybody to everybody else. It's an amazing kind of gift. I know that there's many dark side aspects to it, but it's a wonderful way of connecting, and we can do so much more. I can send you attachments for this thing, and I know that Scylla Elworthy here, who's working with people in Africa and with conflict resolution, that the internet is absolutely invaluable, isn't it, Scylla? Mm. Yeah, I think one last, because we must break now, I think.
Yes. And a question regarding the sequence of the colours in the alchemical process with the black and the red and the white and so on. What interests me is if you have somebody, well, this is in modern times, in analysis, and they go through their process of dreams with the analyst, to what extent this sequence of colours might be observable. I was talking to one of my friends this week who's a young analyst, and she said she has occasionally had patients or clients with her in long term where she's observed these colours. One in particular, she said, where this woman had quite a few dreams that all had white very, very predominantly in it. I mean, in retrospect, it's a long time ago since I was in analysis, and I don't think the analyst that I was with knew anything about alchemy, but in retrospect I just remember quite a lot of dreams with water and several with fire. But it isn't from your experience, have you had many clients where you could observe one going through the different colours in their dreams?
No, I haven't, and I haven't observed it really in myself, because they came not necessarily in a sequence, but they can be repeated, so you may not notice. And I didn't know as much as I know now when I was either a therapist or in analysis myself. So I didn't really notice, except that I did keep a record of dreams.
Yes.
But I don't think I don't think it'd be very precise and clear like that, except possibly in somebody who was about to go through to die. Then you might have a sort of recapitulation, very rapid. I think we must break now, otherwise we'll be too late for the end. Thank you very much.